Good evening and welcome to the session this evening. If you will join me for a moment of silent prayer and then we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, speak.
Now, sound good?
Dr. Clay.
I'd like this to be recorded verbatim, please. In Providence, North Carolina. As commissioners, you each took an oath of office which reads, I do solemnly swear that I will support and maintain the Constitution and laws of the United States and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina, not inconsistent therewith. I will faithfully discharge the duties of my office as Commissioner of Castle County, so help me God. This does not say I get to pick and choose which laws of North Carolina I will support. One North Carolina law is the Public Records Law. On June 16, 2014, an employment agreement for the county manager stated this employee may be suspended for cause, and the 6 readings included failure to follow established rules and policy of the county, and failure to follow instructions of commissioners. The public records policy approved in October 2019 requires public record orders to be completed within a reasonable period of time. On December 30th last year, I questioned the completion date for the June 30th, 2021 annual budget audit. The retired finance director's pay plus a consultant CPA would have covered the expense of a full-time accountant, as recommended in the 2020 budget audit and discussed on March 11th. On January 20th, I added a FOIA request asking salaries and or legal fees paid to all attorneys in 2020 and 2021. This is relevant to your discussion on March 14th about in-house bill and tax collections. How do you approve $1 million off budget spending or begin the next budget discussions without an audited or reconciled budget? I have recently contacted the Assistant to the North Carolina Attorney General, the District Liaison for the Office of Senator President Pro Tem, the Director of the State and Local Government Finance Division, and the Director of North Carolina Open Government Coalition. They all concur that your response or lack of response has been unsatisfactory and not consistent with North Carolina public record laws. With their guidance on March 4th, I rewrote my request in legalese with greater specificity for records. Still no response. However, enforcement of this North Carolina law remains dependent upon instructions from commissioners and compliance from staff. Any resident who is denied access to public records may apply to the General Court of Justice for order of compelling disclosures. There will be changes in November, and perhaps new commissioners will be willing to advocate for residents and adhere to their oaths of office to follow all North Carolina laws. Another agenda with no action items, no budget, no county manager updates. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who will wish to speak in public comment? If not, we will consider the public comments closed at this time. Recognitions. Owen. Okay, no recognitions tonight. Agenda, approval of the agenda. We have a motion and a second on the floor to approve the agenda. I'll do roll call voting. Mr. Howell? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Owen? Mr. Ostraker? And McVeigh? Aye. Motion carries. Approval of the consent agenda A, B, and C of the minutes meetings.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion and a second for approval on the consent agenda. I'll do roll call voting. Commissioner Howell? Commissioner Jeffries? Commissioner Owen? Mr. Ostraker? McVeigh? Aye. Motion carries. Discussion items, Economic Development Action Plan. Mr. Miller.
Commissioners, as I understand it from our last meeting, the board would like to entertain more economic development recruitment. We are happy to go through this process and put the needed funding in the upcoming year's fiscal year budget that would be needed to do economic development recruitment. As we talked about before, the current economic development strategic plan was not focused on recruitment, but rather it was focused on entrepreneurship and growing small businesses, which is a totally different tactic than recruitment. But we're happy to entertain recruitment in whatever way the board sees fit, and we're happy to include those funds in the upcoming year's budget.
Any discussion? Mr. Howell?
Proceed. And getting that in the plan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, advices for commissioners. Mr. Miller.
Commissioners, in your agenda packet, you have several recommendations that come from the Castle County IT Department about the recommendations for devices. I think the number one option is a 10.2-inch iPad along with an iPad case with a keyboard and a Bluetooth mouse. I think that's the option that our IT department would recommend. I think the second option would be a Microsoft Surface laptop for 15 inches. That would be the second recommendation. So it's really, at this point in time, there is a big difference in price between the two, but really it's up to the preference of the board how we proceed.
Questions or comments?
What would we do with the existing Surface Pro?
We would recycle those, and those would be used by county departments.
Or we could use them? Does everybody have to have the same?
Well, I think for ease of accessibility, it would be easier for the entire board to have the same thing. But we're happy to entertain whatever the board wants.
Does the iPad run Outlook?
There is iOS application for Outlook.
What email?
Same email.
Outlook on the iPad?
Yes, that can interface with Outlook for iPad. The board, many of the board members before have used iPads in the past, and they may be more familiar with iPads than laptops. And I think that was one of the reasons for the recommendation is, the ease of use of of the iPads. They're fairly easy to use and update fairly easily. The laptops do provide far more functionality. But whatever the board would like to do, we're happy to take direction from the board on what you would like. Or we're happy to bring it back at the next meeting if you'd like us to do that.
I've always found the iPad easy to work with, but, I mean, it really doesn't matter to me, because I won't have it home. So I don't want to be pushed on either one of them. I think having the keyboard with it will make a difference. That helps. I have a keyboard with mine personally, and that helps a lot too.
Any more discussion, questions on this? If not, we're going to move on.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
can we go back to item 7 for a second?
To the Economic Development Action Plan.
Yes, I'm not sure, what direction we just gave to the county manager. So, is it our intention for him to bring back an economic development plan?
I assume that's what our county manager would do, would be to redo the plan that we have to include more of recruitment.
Okay, now, would we then have to vote on that plan?
Yeah, I would say so.
Commissioner Hall, we're happy to do whatever the board instructs. And we would, the way I had perceived this to work is we would bring back the economic development recruitment plan along with the budget in the budgeting process. And if the board approved the budget, the board would approve the plan at the same time. But if you would like us to split into 2 separate items, we can certainly do that.
So you said within the budget process, I would prefer to see us get the plan with the budget. And then at that point, we can decide if we need to move it to the budget process or not.
That's, we can most
That's
certainly.
fine.
That's fine with me.
I would do.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any more discussion on those 2 items? Action items, we have none. County manager's updates. Mr. Miller.
Commissioners, I have 2 updates for you. We have received notice that there are internet service providers submitting bids for the state great grant process, the growing rural economies with access to technology process. To achieve the maximum scoring criteria for the grant process, each entity planning to apply would need a resolution or maybe one carefully worded resolution that would apply to all entities requiring the county to provide a $250,000 match. A resolution matching this description will probably be on your next agenda. That coincides with the timing for the submission of the applications. The Great Grant would allow another plus or minus 1,000 households to receive broadband internet access in the county. The county contributions for those receiving less than $8 million in ARPA funds were capped at $250,000. Regardless, there's usually a match required of 15, 20, or 50% for the project. This is anticipated to be somewhere in the neighborhood of a $5 million project. At the lower end of the required matches, it would require a $750,000 match, but specifically in the grant criteria, it says if you receive less than $8 million in ARPA funds, your match would be capped at $250,000. It is a competitive scoring process. So for us to receive the maximum amount of points, we would need to provide the $250,000 match. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about that. I have been in touch with internet service providers that do indicate that we're planning on applying for that.
Did you say 400 or 4,000 connections in the county?
1,000. It'll cover an additional 1,000 households.
In addition to what?
In addition to the RDOF funding that has already been awarded to ISPs. So the way in my mind, the way the process is working. We were awarded, or not we, but the internet service providers were given or awarded RDOF funding through the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. So the GREAT grant allows census tracts with speeds of less than 25 meg download and 3 meg upload to be eligible for those tracts. That's what the GREAT grant process would cover. So after we get those residents covered, then there's a program called CAB, Continuing Access to Broadband. The speeds are a little bit, they're not quite as stringent as the 25.3. They may consider, if somebody had 25.3, the CAB program may consider them not to be covered. Or, for instance, if the census tract has one house in that whole census tract that is covered, that whole tract is considered covered because that one house is. What the CAB program realizes is there may be 100 other houses or 10 other houses in that census tract that are not covered. The CAB program will allow us to go after those additional households, in addition to the GREAT grant and in addition to the RDOF funds. But that process needs to be undertaken after the award of the GREAT grant, because before the GREAT grant is awarded, we don't know which households are considered covered and which households are considered not covered. So that's something we'll work through a little later, is the CAB program. It's my understanding that each county there's been about $4 million set aside for each county through the CAB program. Hopefully, by the time RDOF is finished and the GREAT grant is finished, we will not need $4 million to be successful with the CAB program. Hopefully, it'll be closer to $1 million. But that funding is available up to $4 million.
Sounds like there's overlap between the RDOF and the GREAT grant.
There was, you're entirely correct. There was overlap between RDOF and GREAT. Now, the census tracts that were covered by RDOF are no longer covered by GREAT. They have released the tracts that were covered 3 years ago. They have released those census tracts from that GREAT grant award. So ISPs can now apply for those households in this round of GREAT grant funding.
And which ISPs are applying for the GREAT grants?
You know, I know of at least one potentially 2 that plan to apply, but I mean, there could be 10 that plan to apply.
Spectrum one of them?
I would imagine Spectrum is one.
That's what they told us, that they were going to go beyond the RDOF.
Yes.
So what are you asking us to do?
So I'm just making you aware that there's gonna be a resolution on your next agenda packet, that supports ISP surveys plus or minus 1,000 households with broadband internet service. So those ISPs can get a better score, or a more competitive score, which gives us better potential of getting underserved or not served residents in this county served with high-speed broadband.
And that resolution also includes a commitment to spend $250,000
That's correct.
by when? When is that commitment needed?
By the end of the RDOF funding cycle.
Which is,
Not RDOF, Great Grant, and I'm not positive of when. The last one was, I think it was 18, I think it was 18 months or 24 months from the date of the award.
so you're proposing we would put that in the budget, next year's budget?
Yes, but we need to, if they're going to receive the maximum amount of points available, the board will need to make that commitment by its next meeting.
So it's $250,000 to get $5 million?
To get $5 million worth of broadband infrastructure within the county, yes.
Anything else?
I do have, if that's all questions about that, I do have one more update.
What is it? I'm sorry. Look, Bob.
So it's my understanding now that $250,000 match $5 million for service 25
For service one,
25 up, 25 down speeds.
well, the requirement of the Great Grant is that the service will provide 25 up, or 25 down, 3 up. That's a requirement of the Great Grant. However,
3 up and 25 down?
that's correct.
Okay, go ahead.
However, the internet service providers that I've spoken with are set to offer up to 1 gig of internet service, not a minimum of 25 through. So in the scoring criteria, the higher speeds that you offer, the better your score is.
So we've got to make some decisions by the next meeting. Is there a breakdown of the cost of higher than 3 up and 25 down?
A breakdown of costs.
Yes, what would it cost to go higher than that?
No, now, here again, this is a state application. It's a state program. So the state requires that the ISPs do at least 25 down, 3 up, with this program. So I don't know that we have the ability to go in and say, hey, could we do 500,000 if you can provide 200 up and 100 down? Because it's a state program, I think they'll follow the state guidelines. What I'm saying though is the ISPs are set to deliver competitive rates for competitive speeds.
Okay, can you find out before the next meeting?
Yes,
This is 2022. I wouldn't be wanting to pay or willing to pay $250,000 for 3 up and 25 down speeds. I mean,
Yes, sir.
that's next to nothing.
I understand.
So,
I can tell you the internet service providers that I've spoken with will offer up to 1 gig of internet service.
yeah, you said that earlier, they're offering, but at what cost? And you just also said we didn't have the ability, I'm gonna use this word, to negotiate since it was a state program.
Right.
So I want to find out what we can do, because 3 up and 25 down is just, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not really accurate.
And, okay, my final question, Mr. Chairman. What is the status of Spectrum? They're supposed to be here or about here by now.
Spectrum's already turning on service in Catholic County. They're already turning on service to customers off of First Chapel Road and Miles Road.
Okay, that's just barely the cash.
Yeah, they have an area that, they plan to complete within the next 2 months and turn on the entire census block.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Anything else, any more questions?
So I do have one more update, Commissioners.
Okay.
So I want to bring a fact regarding the HIDO, the High Impact Development Ordinance, to the board. One clause in the HIDO is that in order for existing businesses to be entitled to the grandfather provision, was that they had to apply by December 21st, 2021 to be entitled to that grandfather provision. To date, we have had 0 applications for that grandfathering clause. We know there are 8 to 12 businesses that are not in compliance with that that had existed before the HIDO was adopted. The planning department did not contact these businesses prior to December 21st, 2021 deadline, and all of these businesses were unaware of the need to register with the planning department. Based on this information, we would like to extend the application period by 6 months to allow the planning department time to reach out to those businesses individually and allow them enough time to comply with the requirements. I would like to hear your suggestions on this topic, and if hearing none, we would proceed as planned. But just know there is a process that we have to go through with this. It'll have to go, if we proceed as I described, it'll have to go to the planning board. The planning board will have to review and make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. We'll have to have a public hearing. After the public hearing, we'll have to have an amendment, an ordinance amendment. So I want you to know how things look, what we plan to do, and hear if you've got any comments about how we plan to go about doing this.
Well, personally, I think it's the right thing to do, is to extend it. They didn't know about it. Put it in the book.
Everybody okay with that?
Does the planning board have to approve the extension or just make a recommendation?
I think they have to review and make a recommendation. I know we have our county attorney on with us. I don't know if our county attorney has any advice on that.
Good evening. The county manager is correct. Just like any other ordinance amendment process in the land use context, the planning board will review and make a recommendation to the board, and then the board will ultimately decide.
Since the planning board meets tomorrow, will this be done in tomorrow's meeting?
I can ask the county planner to review this with the planning board tomorrow. I can ask him to do that. I think ultimately it's up to the chair of the planning board on whether or not they take the issue up.
And just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, so there's a statutory process, an ordinance process for the amendment that will need to travel the path outlined in the ordinance. So certainly there's nothing at all that would keep the planning board from being apprised of the issue and having some preliminary consideration. But the county planner will just need to follow the proper ordinance process for the amendment.
Just a clarification here. I think I heard that it's up to the chair of the planning board whether it's added to the agenda for tomorrow. Is there any type of public notice or advertising that needs to be done for the planning board to add this on?
There may be, Commissioner Hall, and that's why I was saying they can certainly, the planning board can certainly be made aware of the issue and get some preliminary feedback. But there is a public hearing process. And so it will just need to follow the normal amendment channel, which may require an additional planning board meeting to consider it. But they can certainly start the process by getting an update tomorrow.
Okay, so does that mean it's a follow the normal process? Do we have to wait for the planning board to make a decision?
You have to wait for the planning board to make a recommendation.
All right, okay.
Commissioners, we'll make every effort to follow the process and to do it as quickly as possible to get back to this.
Final thought, can the planning director start this notification process? Seems like that's something that should have been done some time ago. Can you go ahead and start that?
Certainly the outreach to the existing businesses could start yesterday or today. Yes.
Okay.
And that has already happened. The outreach to the existing businesses.
Okay. Just concerned, Mr. Chairman, that it seems like every time we start something, time gets away from us. And there are unknown barriers, it brings up excuses, and the can gets kicked down the road. And I just want to make sure we get started as soon as we can.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions or comments on Mr.
Farrell, isn't there a 45-day deadline for the planning board to come with a recommendation?
There is a deadline for which the planning board must provide the recommendation from their first consideration of the item. And again, the process for their initial consideration, I believe, is laid out in the ordinance and how that comes to them. So you know, but yes, there's a deadline. It will not drag out for the planning board doesn't have the ability to drag out a recommendation longer than the ordinance provides, if that's the question.
And when does that 45 days start? If Mr. Hoagland provides them preliminary information tomorrow, does it start tomorrow or would it be after their next meeting?
You know, I have to look at the ordinance, and I'm happy to pull it up and see what it says as we're talking. I don't know the answer to that question.
One of the items on this ordinance, you're talking about the number of days. It says that the governing board does not receive a written report on the text amendment from the planning board within 30 days of referral of the text amendment to the planning board. The governing board may act on the amendment without the planning board report. It says 30 days in this. Now, that may include other days of notification of that. But it says 30 days in this, from UNC government.
Commissioners, as I said, we understand this is a priority for the board, and we will work as quickly as possible to get this back in front of this board for approval.
Can you also put together a timeline on this?
Yes, absolutely.
With deadlines
Yes,
and actions required?
absolutely.
Thank you.
Any more questions on this? If not, we're moving on to commissioner comments. Are there any? If there are no comments,
I think we should, Mr. Chairman, I think we mentioned all three boards, especially county managers, to check, see about all three boards meeting together, seeing the progress been made on that. All three boards getting together for a quarterly meeting like we used to.
We do not have a date yet, but we're moving forward with that.
Okay.
Mr. Jeffers.
Well, one thing I had the commission on, I remember, and I know I voted yes on it, the pay schedule. I asked you, was your motion was like I said, you said yes, but then later on, it wasn't what I said. I mean, you know, my motion was, when I talked about it, wasn't my motion, that make nobody go over 60,000. But I asked you that, well, putting in your motion, you know, it was the way I said it, you said yeah, but having the motion won't make that way, you know.
Well, I didn't understand that. I thought you meant the 2%.
I didn't understand it, then I wouldn't vote the way I did.
You said 2% over 60,000 is what I thought you were talking about, the 2% raise for over 60,000.
Yeah, 2%, nobody go over 60,000. I talked to the county manager, talked to the sheriff about this, and they said it could be done, but it wasn't done.
Well, it wasn't a motion or an amendment to my motion. So.
No, I didn't amend it, I didn't hear it. I thought I asked you, did you vote it? Was your motion was made that way? You said yeah, so, you know, I had no reason to amend it, but it wasn't. You just cleared it up.
Yeah, I just made the motion according to the sheet that we received from the county manager.
That's all. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Announcements and upcoming events. April the 4th, 22, Board of Commissioners meeting at 9 a.m. April the 11th of 22, Castle Economic Development meeting at 1 p.m. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to go into closed session to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential, which privilege is hereby acknowledged in CGS 143-318, period 11, parentheses A, parentheses 1.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We'll do roll call voting. Commissioner Howell. Aye. Commissioner Jeffries. Aye. Commissioner Ostrager. Aye. Commissioner Carter. McVeigh, aye. Motion carries. We now sit in closed session. We're now back in open session. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion to adjourn. We have a motion and a second. We'll do roll call voting. Mr. Hall. Mr. Jeffers. Owen. Mr. Ostrander. Mr. Carter.
Aye.
And McVeigh, aye. Motion carries. We're now adjourned. Thank you very much.